Welcome to the Digital Therapeutics edition of Digital Health Today, and I'm your host, Eugene Burhovich. In the last episode, I have spoken to Jessica Schull, European lead for the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. Jessica and I spend most of the time peeling the onion on the European Union landscape for DTX. So for this episode, I decided to stay in Europe and interview one of the founding fathers of the DTA, Pierre Leurent. Yes, that's me in my attempt at a French accent. Pierre is the CEO and founder of Voluntis, the first publicly listed DTX company on the Euronext in Paris. But before we dive in, I very briefly met Pierre at a First Frontiers Health conference in Berlin. Pierre struck me as a very kind individual, fast-paced, and a determined entrepreneur. And now we jump to my conversations with Pierre. I'm here with Pierre Leurent. Am I pronouncing this correctly, first of all? But you'll tell me when you're break. And I'm honored to have what I would call one of the fathers of digital therapeutics. And I'm not trying to aid you in any way, shape, or form. But I'd love for our listeners to get to know you first. So maybe a little bit of background on yourself, kind of how you came into this industry or even creating parts of this industry. And then let's just pause there.
Thanks, Eugene, and thanks again for the invitation. So my last name is Pierre Leurent. So as you can see,
I was close.
I'm French. So my background is I'm an engineer by training. I've always been passionate about the field of digital health, especially because I believe that we are in the middle of two major revolutions. The digital revolution, but also a revolution in medicine with more and more personalized healthcare. So that led me to want to apply my engineering skills to a field with meaning, healthcare. And I started my career at GE Medical Systems, where I work in their medical imaging division. So at that time, I was contributing to very fancy stuff, software that helps you navigate through the body, through MRI and X-rays. And I saw, great technology there. I wanted to work in Silicon Valley. So I work for a technology company that is developing electronic medical records in the field of cardiology. So I saw great technologies for healthcare professionals, but I saw also the emerging power of digital technology that we could apply also to help patients more directly. So I really wanted to see how we could best support patients in self-managing their treatment on a daily basis, how we could better connect the patients with their healthcare team. And I didn't see really solutions that were, going very far in that direction. So ultimately, that led me to start about thinking about creating a company to be able to provide this innovation to the market. And that's the story behind the early days of the creation of Voluntis.
So you saw the potential of technology, and what year that was like this spark was, hey, let me actually go on this entrepreneurial journey and create a company around this?
So it was right, in the early 2000 years. So right after, the burst of the internet bubble. So it was really the early days of, eHealth in general. So we started the company first as a software company, but we evolved over time. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk more about it today.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? To your point, right after the dot-com bubble where the internet was used for widgets and gadgets to be delivered, which is still is to the case. Maybe talk a little bit about actually that journey, right? Because I don't know if Voluntis as a name existed already in 2000 and maybe talk about your entrepreneurial journey. And I'm sure at the time there was no concept of it. There was digital. There was molecular therapeutics, but the concept of digital therapeutics probably didn't even exist, nor even you had it in your mind in early 2000.
Yes. So I'm happy to share more about our trajectory as a company. When you're right, when we started, there was no such thing as digital therapeutics. So we were talking about, medical software. The guiding principle and the vision behind Voluntis has not changed over the years. I mean, it has still been, to support patients in, self-managing their treatment, improving their experience with their therapy. The vision has perfected over time and has, evolved, also as the space evolved itself. But when we started, we were developing regular software that we would use in patient support programs, disease management programs. We had more like a B2B or, software as a service type of business. That was good. I mean, we grew the company and we worked with pharma, medtech, insurance companies, healthcare service providers. We reached, break even in 2011 under that model and so on. But we also, had seen the early results of that approach, and we felt that we could look into doing something further than that. And when I say further than that, we really wanted to see how we could, embed medical intelligence into our system to generate automatically interventions to patients to best support them along the way of the treatment. So that led us to think about how we could, embed algorithms into our software to create automatically recommendations that would help patients make better decisions on a daily basis. So we teamed up with scientific partners, initially in the field of diabetes, where we saw an opportunity to support patients treated on insulin to help them get instant advice regarding the right dose of insulin to inject. As you know, about a third of diabetic patients worldwide need to inject insulin, and it's a very effective drug, but you need to use it appropriately. Unfortunately, in the real world, it's not done appropriately in a large number of cases. So we felt that it would be great if we could provide smart guidance to patients as they need to make these decisions on the right dose of insulin to inject, how to better connect them with our care team. So we decided to work with scientific partners to create new algorithms that would help collect patient data, but create a virtuous feedback loop to the patient so that we could immediately support them. And we did something crazy at that time. It was in probably around 2006. We decided to start clinical trials around our software. So that was, pretty early.
That's how crazy ideas always come to life, right? If you have persistence. So.
Yes. So we did some feasibility studies first in a limited setting, in one hospital, a few patients, and we were impressed by the results. That encouraged us to do more in terms of clinical evaluation, to do studies of a larger scale, and ultimately we did a randomized control trial that produced results in 2011. That time it was like a wow moment, because we got very positive results in terms of clinical efficacy for our solutions, and all of a sudden, what was just a crazy idea with a software solution became a true medical product with value demonstrated from a clinical standpoint using the highest levels of rigor in the industry.
So let me just rewind and understand a little bit of the journey, which again sounds like a trailblazer, you and your team, right? So early 2000, almost like a software play, moving on into a patient support program. I'll call it instrumentation, right? Because a lot of pharma still to this day are looking at patient support programs as cost of doing business, but not actually looking at it as a huge driver of the business. That's my 2 cents on it. So you came in to, I'll say, optimize that relationship as a platform. And then the crazy part is, okay, let's actually, I'll call it inject, software interventions and algorithms as part of that journey. And that was the big aha moment in around 2006.
Yes, and it's really how we could create a companion to patients' treatment, how we could have some people say like a doctor in the pocket, that would instantly guide you through your treatment journey, and that would demultiply, what we are currently doing most of the time with, mostly human interventions with people on the phone, that support patients, how technology can help us, scale, interventions, can really provide instantly the right support for patients when they need it. And there is a great need for that across therapeutic areas. So even though we started with diabetes at the first place, we really from day one wanted to see how we could create a platform that would be applicable across multiple disease areas. And right now we are active in different fields. We'll probably talk more about it. But So the defining moment was really demonstrated clinical efficacy for our digital solution. And that's still today what I guess is the common denominator of true digital therapeutics. It's really an intervention for patients that is clinically validated. A number of things also happened for us in between 2010 and 2012 in terms of regulatory landscape. Mm-hmm. The regulations changed both in the US and in Europe at that time. So these software solutions became medical devices. So that had, a profound implication, because now, you would more readily define the type of products we create as software as medical devices. For instance, our diabetes product is regulated as a medical device. It's a class 2 in the US. It's a class 2B in Europe. And we had to also change, the organization of the company, because we were shifting essentially from a software organization to more of a life science organization. So at that time, we added new members in our leadership team. such as, for example, a new chief medical officer. We created a QA and regulatory affairs department. And essentially, we were operating more as a medtech organization. So that was very important. Clinical evidence first, change in regulatory status second. On top of that, a third element happened in the same period of time. We changed of business model. And we started
I was just going to go there.
Yes.
Your original hypothesis sounds like, and again, to the extent that you can disclose kind of the platform for patient support programs, probably per patient per month or some kind of larger deals, but then that pivot into really having clinical operations, chief medical officer, working with the governments and regulators on reimbursements as a medical device. So yeah, talk to me about that switch, not organizational, but more on the business model side.
As I mentioned, before that period of time, we were more like with an IT business model. So, selling licenses of our software, selling services around that. So that was, good. It's still
as an engineer, founder, right?
Yes,
that's what
right.
you know.
Yeah, that was natural. That was natural. Yep. But so again, we saw the opportunity to do more than that, and we also pioneered another crazy idea, which was to look at what the biotech industry was doing, and we wanted to see whether we could apply the same type of partnering approaches that biotech uses with big pharma to the digital space. And in 2011, we were the first company to license a product of that kind under a biopharmaceutical licensing model, just like a biotech firm.
And now it's kind of common, right? A lot of DTXs, I'm kind of starting to say the DTX deals are looking more and more like the pharma biotech deals for dozens of years now.
Yes, and I think it makes a lot of sense because you're talking about licensing a medical technology, with great potential, with demonstrated value. So there is a common way of doing business in the pharma industry, which is to go through these kind of agreements. And I think it makes a lot of sense. For some of the products, that are targeting, let's say, medication optimization, we can talk more about that. But these biopharmaceutical models, are structured as, pre-launch revenues, post-launch revenues. Pre-launch is when typically a pharma company licenses our platform, wants to do some kind of co-development around it, just to make sure that we provide a very personalized patient experience, which is very tailored for a specific drug. So we have a common platform that we apply for all our products, but still we can adjust it sometimes to, in terms of user interface, in terms of some algorithms, due to the specific profile of the drug and so on. So we start typically a collaboration now with some kind of co-development, which can include also a specific clinical trial with our partner. So, it can be as fast as, 6 months if there is no huge work, and we can just take the platform as it is and, go to market with it. But most of the time, it typically is a co-development phase about 2 to 3 years. Yep. And then we are ready to go to market with our co-developed solution. And then, we enter a new phase in terms of commercial revenue, which is more like what we call the post-launch revenues, which still take the form of per patient licensing, but it's much closer to a royalty as you would find it in the biotech world.
So for our listeners, and honestly, even for myself who've been around, and again, not as a practitioner of digital therapeutics, but some of your earlier products, and I know we'll talk a little bit where you're also heading around diabetes, so Insulio and Diabeo, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Twofold question. One, are those your standalone, you go to market yourself with these products, or are these modified based on your partner, as in pharma or something else? So that's one side of the question. The second part of that is, what is that experience as me as a patient or health consumer, right? So let's break this apart. So the first one is, are those standalone, you go to market yourself, or how does that work in your model?
Yeah, great question. So at the core of every one of our solutions is our platform. So that's really our proprietary asset. There are 2 areas where we decided to develop end-to-end products. So it's diabetes and oncology. Insulia is a perfect example of a development that we did ourselves to go up to an end-to-end product. That is directly linked to an investment decision, by the way, by the company. Mm-hmm. When we realized that there is a compelling opportunity for us to go one step further than the platform and go as far as getting, let's say, the final product on our own with our own IP, then we decide to go through that extra step and go through regulatory clearance on our own and so on. So that's what we did in diabetes. We have expanded into oncology about 6 years ago. And again, we have redone that. Now we have a solution which is called Olina that is focused on helping patients with better symptoms management. And as you know, in many cases in cancer therapies, people experience side effects. They need help to figure out what's the right thing to do when these symptoms occur. So there is a great need to help patients better navigate through these issues. And here we have applied our logics a little differently. We provide recommendations to guide patients on what they should be doing when these symptoms occur, whether they should be changing their behavior, whether they should be adding a specific drug, for to help through that symptomatic management. Or we also detect the need for escalation to the care team. And that's the beauty of combining digital technology with also human support. It's really how we can tell the care team that it's the right time to intervene in between face-to-face visits. But coming back to your question, there are two areas where we have our own solutions, diabetes and oncology. And we have done some licensing of our platforms with pharma. So we apply these products, but sometimes we fine-tune them. Also, for example, when we see that it's good to go one step further for a specific type of insulin, for example, or in some cases when you need to connect the solution to other devices. And now there is more talk about ecosystems in the making. Yep. So a digital therapeutic increasingly is going to, for example, retrieve data from sensors. In the future, you'll see more and more connected drugs, connected drug delivery systems. So in that case, the digital therapeutic will also usually talk to the connected device that administers the drug and so on. So there is a part of, all these different settings that prompts for some kind of co-development effort and adjustment in partnership with pharma. And beyond diabetes and oncology, we regularly get requests from the pharma industry that is interested in leveraging our platform. And in that case, we look at these opportunities. We can deploy our platform, but then maybe there is more co-development because the pharma is the one that provides more expertise, more knowledge about the specific sector, and then we just co-develop again a final product. And we did that in coagulation, for example.
And I guess you guys are trying to, again, mimic a little bit of the biotech model going forward, I would expect, right?
In terms of licensing model, yes. From a commercialization standpoint, yes. Yep. Let's say the phenotype of our business model is more the one of maybe a digital biotech. Yep. So it's long-standing agreements. Some of our contracts span over 10 years. So it's really a very close relationship. I mean, we'll see more and more of these, solutions that will be somehow paired or in companionship with drugs along the life cycle of the drug itself. So, we're talking about potentially very long-standing relationships.
Just to kind of close off on the patient or health consumer experience. So obviously, when you're going to market yourself with, let's say, Olina, right? As a patient, if I'm on a particular drug or if I am diagnosed, can you walk me through a little bit of what that experience for me as a patient how does it get prescribed to me, a little bit of the flow?
Yeah. So our solutions require a prescription by the healthcare team. It's directly related to the type of intervention that we deliver to patients. So, and that's, the regulators typically demand that, both in the US and in Europe. For example, insulin is a specific therapy that needs to be carefully, prescribed and administered. So, you need to be very cautious about, the level of dosing that you can generate through your, recommendations and so on. So it's, let's say, not really an option. These solutions need to be, prescribed by care teams. It's the same, in oncology where, side effect management, working around the effect of a cancer treatment is very, specific. So there is, let's say, a need to extend the physician prescription and to integrate these solutions within the actual care delivery pathway, the actual workflow of the clinician. So everything would start with a care team that would see an interest to introduce this solution for a particular patient. So by the way, the pharma industry helps us also get to the care teams at the first place in multiple geographies. But so the care teams have different options to prescribe and use our solutions. They can go online and do that through our web portal. They can, sign forms also that we can retrieve then to initiate and so on. So once the prescription is done, there is an activation code which is generated by the system. This code is provided to patients, so they can download the application on their smartphones. So it works with most smartphones today, iOS, Android devices. But to start using the software, you need to enter this activation code, which is the outcome of the prescription. Once you're with the product that has been activated, you can start using it. So typically, what we do is we enable the patients to enter data, either through manual data entry, or if you have a sensor, for example, that collects data automatically, we can retrieve that data by connecting directly to the sensors. Then what's happening is our algorithms engine kicks in, digests the data that we collect, and automatically, thanks to the decision support rules that we have embedded into our platform, we provide them with an instant real-time recommendation that is actionable for patients. And then we have this ongoing help with the self-management of the treatment. At the same time, the data is again shared back with the care team online. So the care team can access all this information using dashboards. They have automated notifications that they can customize. They can get reports and so on. So that's really what can be also helpful to bridge the gap between patients and healthcare providers remotely.
So obviously it's a prescription, digital therapeutic, doctors involved. Where do you see the continuing role of, because you started the company about the thesis of self-care as well, right? And digital technologies. Where do you see the role of doctors, nurses, but also health coaches, which has been one of the hotter things on the market, even though health coaching has been around for 20 years?
So the doctors, are typically going to be involved in the prescription of digital therapeutics. They are going to be also involved in, key decision making along, the treatment journey. But what we're seeing is more and more like a team play around the use of our products. And it's, frequent that, we'll see nurses acting on behalf of the physician, taking a more active role in being the actual regular users of these technologies. So it's clear in diabetes. It's also happening in oncology. Nurses are really are doing a lot to support patients on a continuous basis. And I think we see tremendous potential to support their work, also to improve it, because a lot of things that can be repetitive and don't necessarily require a lot of human skills can be automated, whereas we can help them focus really on the more compelling situations, the more delicate parts of the treatment where humans are essential to drive treatment adjustments and to also support patients. So health coaches are a great complement to that. I think there is only such things that the care team can do. Care teams are usually overloaded in many cases, and I see a good opportunity for organizations that can help extend the care team in general. And sometimes we're talking about completely new roles also. Exactly. in the healthcare system, roles that didn't exist that require specific skill sets. So that's fascinating. I mean, we are also looking at an evolution of let's say the functions across the care delivery pathway.
So since we're still talking about a little bit on touching with pharma and prescriptions, I've always said a little bit that I'll say the more modern DTX companies like yourself that are evolving, there's a bit of this frenemy relationship with pharma, because on one side you can go direct, you can go to market access, but there's a huge value in pharma also, not just from market access perspective, but also clinical. But, I wrote last November around, will the novel DTX company, knowing the experience of the end consumer much better than the traditional pharma, swallow that molecular pill inside the experience and the digital therapeutic experiences? Or will pharma start swallowing DTX companies as part of that? So I'm curious where your head is. Fully understand that, a big core part of your business is pharma, but just curious if you fast forward, where's your head on this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and I think it's good to speculate about the future of the industry. Personally, I believe that we'll see different flavors of digital therapeutics moving forward. So there is not going to be one size fits all model. At a high level, I would say that you have, broadly speaking, two different categories of digital therapeutics. One is really positioned as a substitute to drug therapies. You could call that a standalone treatment. The second category is companions to drug therapies. So really to help optimize medications in the real world. Voluntis is really specialized today in the second category. So, we don't have, let's say, the positioning of willing to replace a drug, but we still acknowledge the fact that there are very effective interventions that could be effective as another option in addition to drugs. Great companies are active in that category today. It's fascinating to see that there is more and more potential modalities to best support patients in a, let's say, non-molecular way.
Yep.
In our case, we see a tremendous need and that is still to be met, really, to optimize medications in daily lives. In a nutshell, you have very effective drugs today and more efficient therapies. However, in a growing number of cases, sometimes there are complex therapies with administration challenges, dosing issues. You see more and more treatments administered at home. You see a need to help manage side effects. You need to help, connect the patient with the care team. And we have seen that, for example, in oncology. It's been very interesting. Few past 10 years, where you had treatment that initially were administered exclusively at the hospital. Now it's shifting gradually towards more treatments administered at home. You see more and more oral therapies. So the formulations of the drug are evolving also. And there is a great need to support these transitions of care. So in our case, we see a very important avenue in focusing on optimizing drugs. And we are pretty specialized, and we want to be at the leading edge in really digitally augmenting therapies. And I think if we talk about the future of the pharma industry, and we'll see more and more combinations, I believe. So more and more drugs are going to be combined with a form of digital companion. We really want to be one of the companies of reference for pharma when they want to go into that direction. But is one industry going to swallow the other? Personally, I think that everyone should stay in their core area of competency. Right. Our core competency at Voluntis is really creating these smart digital companions. The core competency of a pharma is really to develop great molecules. I think we can jointly take advantage of each other's great DNA and competencies to develop transformative experiences for patients. And I don't have the ambition to replace the manufacturer of the drug. And I think pharma realizes that other players can also complement their core areas of expertise.
Yeah, it's the talented individuals across the whole health and care industry, right? But I think we are seeing quite a lot of pull and push of talent across, right? Which is actually great, and which is what creating some of this. So sticking to this, I like your sort of definition a bit of the substitute to drug therapy and a companion to the molecular drug therapy. On that same note, and in some of the discussions with Brian Dolan, for example, the concept of prescription digital therapeutic, which a companion or a substitute can be, as you guys are, and as, for example, Ecole is, right? And then there is a little bit of misnomer of, I'll call it novel health services that are also, and I won't mention any names of the companies, but that also have software-based interventions, but also human services around it, for example, like health coaches. Where do you see the delineation, or it's not, between kind of prescription digital therapeutics, both substitute and companion, and novel health services? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, what is, I guess, the optimal care is really to take advantage of the best in digital technology and the best in human interventions. And I think, what we're trying to find is really the optimal balance, between the two. So I wouldn't necessarily think that digital technology will, take over and really replace a human intervention. What we have seen in various cases, in our different areas of development, that both are very relevant, but when used appropriately. So, for example, there is a lot of waste, in the industry in general, but human interventions that are being performed without a great deal of visibility, on where the patient is actually on their journey. In the US, you see multiple organizations intervening around the patient. The payers are developing their, care management programs. Their PBM might be doing some intervention. The pharma might be doing some kind of patient support program. Then the care team is also evolving on creating more human coaches. Now you have also private companies that have their health coaches on the phone and so on. Sometimes, it can be confusing for patients because you have many different organizations that don't necessarily share data, by the way. I think what we need to do really as an industry is to find the optimal mix of intervention. We know what our technologies can do. We know what our technology still cannot do today. We know that our technology can go to a certain extent, but then it's necessary for the care team to do something with that data and to potentially, for example, adjust the treatment, change the prescription for an oncology drug or something else. So I don't think that there is necessarily a model that is better than the other. I mean, we need both, sectors, and we need to find, according to each therapeutic area, what is the right balance on mix of intervention to do what's best for patients. So we're trying to find the best high-tech and high-touch experience, I believe, in all these different fields. And the equation is different according to the disease state, according to what patients really need on a daily basis. But for me, it's not a black and white question. We really see that it's great to have new health services, such as the one that you described. And there is a good case also for stronger partnering in the space as we discussed, yep. Because I think we need to bridge the gap in the interest of patients, between multiple groups intervening. So it's important to better coordinate approaches in general.
Speaking of coordination and cooperation, so let's take the time capsule back in time. I want to say probably around 2016. I still remember this was, I think, around JP Morgan, a little side event where you and I might have met with Roberto and Mark. And I remember, I think Eddie Matucci was showing a game, right? And I believe, to my knowledge, that's when sort of the concept of the Digital Therapeutic Alliance was born. But please correct me, kind of what transpired in your head and few others. So give us a little bit of the history of how the Digital Therapeutic Alliance was formed and what was the original purpose, which is, I think, the DTA is still sticking to. So just, a few minutes in the history capsule.
Yeah, thanks for this great moment that we had, collectively. I mean, personally, I'm very convinced of industry-wide collaboration. I mean, for the past years, I've seen the value of collaborating in different circles to advance specific topics that are much larger than every single company's business. Mm-hmm. So I think we are up to something big and something massive here in terms of transformation of the healthcare industry. And a number of companies that have been pioneering in the space have found similar needs. I mean, to catalyze the introduction of these solutions on it's massive change management that we need to go through. How to get to a point where these solutions are prescribed routinely at scale in many geographies of the world. How to get to a point where payers start reimbursing for these solutions, but also for the activities that the healthcare professionals do to prescribe and use these solutions, even when there is no face-to-face visits, when they have to engage remotely with patients and so on. All these questions go much beyond a single, company business. And I felt, that by starting to, addressing these kind of challenges, that it was probably the right time to team up with other like-minded individuals that were CEOs of other great digital therapeutics companies that were starting to achieve a certain level of maturity. And by talking to some of our peers, Eddie and Corey and David at Popular, we had Sean at Omala. A few of these individuals really realized that it was
cooperation is the new competition.
It was compelling to join forces and really start talking more about how to tackle these issues at an industry level. And again, we realized that there was no such group already there. And we were talking about the birth of a new industry sector. So essentially we...
So that was in 2016, or I know that in 2017 you guys officially launched, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so that, there was an initial dialogue about how to go with it, in terms, how to formally assemble the DTA. I mean, I had the pleasure of, working with Megan, who is now the executive director of DTA. And, she was instrumental also in helping us really define put it together as a standalone organization separate from, each of our companies. So we looked at the different, options. So we decided to incorporate, this new organization as a new industry trade association in the US, but we also wanted from day one to have more of a global view. So there was a lot of fine tuning that happened at the early stages. And
I think still is, right? Because I'm sure as a small organization, and we've had Megan and Jessica on this podcast as well, that there's a lot to do globally, right? And
yes.
Some of these great examples of countries stepping up and saying, well, this makes sense, right?
Yeah, and I am amazed by the great uptake of the DTA also. I mean, it's fascinating to see the great, interventions that are being invented in multiple parts of the world. And, when we look at also the disease areas where you see digital, therapeutics today, it's vast and it's expanding. And you see the geographies where, these solutions are implemented. It's really, truly worldwide now. So, we have fast grown our, membership since we started about 3 years ago. And now you have a very diverse group of companies, and it's more and more global. So even if a lot of things around digital therapeutics started in the US and in Europe, now you start to see, great innovation from Asia and other places in the world. And that's really fascinating to me.
Well, that sound means it's time for a question from my journalistic partner on this podcast, Brian Dolan, who is the founder of Exits and Outcomes, and as I like to call him, the digital health detective. Let's see what question Brian has for our guest today.
Okay, here's my question. Voluntis is one of the few digital health companies that is publicly listed. This, of course, brings with it a greater deal of transparency around its financials, around maybe losing big customers, etc. So why did Voluntis decide to list on a public market while it was still a relatively small company? And if you could do it over, would you make a different decision?
Thank you, Brian. So I'm happy to share more about also our journey on what led us to go public on Euronext in Paris about 2 years ago. So about in 2017, we looked at our options to catalyze the growth of the company, and we felt that it was the right time for us to accelerate and to raise several dozens of million euros in that case to support our expansion in the US, notably expansion into oncology, and taking advantage also of new reimbursement frameworks in both in the US and in Europe. So at that time, we reviewed our different options. We we're just starting to get to an interesting level of maturity as a company with solutions that were already regulatory cleared, that were just starting to get covered by payers starting in Europe. We had also an initial set of flagship partnerships with pharma companies. So it was really the start of an opportunity for us to get listed in Europe. And we looked at our options carefully. Either we would go through another round of private funding, either we would go public on Euronext. It was a careful assessment about different parameters, whether we would get the funding that we would need, whether we would be at the valuation range that we would like, whether our investors would prefer this option or the other. So a decision was made at that time to go public on Euronext. So there are advantages and constraints associated with being a listed company. To your point, there is a great deal of transparency, and so we have had to structure really our operations even further. So there is a great deal of information that we share with the markets on a regular basis. By the way, that is good also, I guess, for commercial discussions, because our partners see a company with a certain level of maturity, and they know that they can find the relevant information about the way we do business out there. So there is also great advantages where, for example, in raising new funds. As an example, recently we executed a private placement. Essentially, the execution of the transaction took 24 hours. So, being a private company, it usually took, months to get to the same results. So, there are some specificities associated with a public company, but it's still an effective way, for European companies to gain access to capital in a space where, large fundraisers, back at that time were still not very common.
Yep. No, agreed. Part of the reason for this podcast is to get to know the trailblazers and the people driving this industry. So would love to know, what is your why and what makes you get up in the morning?
So, the why for me is really that we make a difference in patients' lives. That's really, what has been a key motivator for me since, I work in this industry for me to start, Voluntis with my fellow co-founders. So, it's very gratifying to see, the testimonials from patients using our products on a regular basis. I can tell you in our team, as soon as we get, these kind of testimonials, we feel rewarded about, the fact that what we're doing is right. It's right for patients, it's right for the industry. And it's also it's obvious that the industry is going to move in that direction. I guess the key question that is really the pace of that transition. But if you talk to everybody, a lot of people will acknowledge that in the future, you'll see this new form of therapies, digitally augmented therapies, and a lot of data will support the way the healthcare system works in general. I would say another key motivator for me is also it's not every day that you can work in a new industry in the making. I think I feel fortunate to work in a very exciting space and to be at the forefront of a big revolution. So digital therapeutics, I'm convinced, is going to be massive. It's going to be a large industry, a new industry sector. So the pharma industry, the medtech industry. I think the digital therapeutics is a new industry. To me, it's very exciting to be working at this particular moment of in time at the very beginning of a new industry.
Yeah, transformational for sure. So thank you very much, Pierre, for taking the time with our audience, and hopefully the audience found this very useful and helpful.
Great, thank you, Eugene.
Thanks so much for tuning into Digital Therapeutics edition of Digital Health Today, a production of Mission-Based Media. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to this podcast on your favorite podcast player, so you're then automatically notified when we post our upcoming episodes, where I speak with dozens of leaders and trailblazers who are forging the path for digital therapeutics. If you'd like to learn more about Your Coach Health or Brian Dolan's Exit and Outcomes, you can always find the links to this and more in the show notes for this episode. You can connect with me personally on Twitter at HealthEugene, or follow my journey of writing my first book, Heart Pill to Swallow, at heartpilltoswallow.substack.com. I'm Eugene Borhovich, and catch you next time.